Welcome to the Louisiana Business and Industry Show. And now your host, Tim Johnson.
John Kennedy is one of the most recognizable figures in Louisiana state politics. As state treasurer, he's been a watchdog and an outspoken critic of government spending. He's announced that he's running for the U.S. Senate seat being vacated by David Vitter. State Treasurer John Kennedy joins us when we return on the Louisiana Business and Industry Show.
In Baton Rouge, see your Good Neighbor State Farm agent Brady Flavin for your insurance and financial needs.
Consumers and property owners with construction projects can have a successful result or regretful experiences that could have been avoided. Before any construction project, verify licensure of the contractor and check references. Scammers will claim to be insured or bonded, so always check first. Download our app, LA Contractor, from the Android or Apple Store. Visit our website, lacontractor.org, or contact the Louisiana State Licensing Board for Contractors. We're here to help before things go wrong. Hire a licensed contractor. It's the law.
Since 1919, we've designed and constructed hundreds of industrial plants, roads, ships, dams, and executed some of the most complex jobs in the world. In fact, our quality and dependability are legendary. Today, the legend continues as Brown & Root delivers engineering, construction, maintenance, and industrial specialty services throughout the U.S. and the world from our headquarters here in Louisiana. We are Brown & Root.
For over a quarter century, Kelly's has operated with honesty, integrity, and above all, safety. Kelly's features a fleet of quality equipment operated by dedicated, safety-minded employees skilled in land clearing, above-ground right-of-way maintenance, vegetation control, station yard and manned facility maintenance, above-ground pipeline support, and more. Kelly's Industrial Services, where pipeline right-of-way maintenance gets done right.
Welcome back to the Louisiana Business and Industry Show. Very pleased to be joined by Louisiana State Treasurer John Kennedy, who also happens to be a candidate for the U.S. Senate. Treasurer, welcome.
Thanks, Tim.
Glad you're here.
Thanks for having me.
One of the most recognizable figures in politics in our state for a long, long time, but let's make sure our viewers understand your background. Talk a little bit about that background, growing up in Zachary, and I think, and then maybe a little bit about your political career.
Well, I'm from a little town north of here, north of Baton Rouge, called Zachary. Now, when I grew up in Zachary, it was small, about 3,000 people. My dad was a small businessman. He owned a little lumberyard. My mom was a retired school teacher. I loved Zachary, still do. Loved Zachary High School. I'd go back in a second.
Just won a girls' state championship in track.
That's right.
Last week. I don't know if you saw that, right?
My sport was basketball.
There.
I cared about basketball and cheerleaders. And I wasn't any good at either one, but I had fun trying.
There you go.
Went away to college, went away to law school, came home after about 10 years. I live in Madisonville on the north shore of Lake Pontchartrain, a little town there. My wife, Becky, is a lawyer. She works in the court system. My son, Preston, is in college. He's a rising junior. He's making his grades. He's got no visible tattoos, so Dad is happy. Yeah. I got into politics with Governor Romer, worked for Governor Foster, ran the Department of Revenue, and I've been treasurer since the year 2000.
A very interesting and outspoken political career. We'll talk a little bit about that, but you mentioned your son, and you know, my 3 kids are all grown and doing well. My youngest will be 20 this year, and I saw a saying one time that a parent can only be as happy as his least happy child.
That's
right. I
right.
guess you've seen that, right?
I've learned, Preston's taught me there's nothing wrong with teenagers that reasoning with them will not make worse.
That's exactly been my experience anyway. Let's talk about the job of state treasurer. Now, I mean, I think people hear the term state treasurer, they kind of have an understanding of what that means. But talk about the specific duties of the state treasurer and maybe some of the things you've tried to focus on.
I'm in charge of all the state's bank accounts. That sounds simple, but we have a lot of them, and my job is to make sure everybody gets their money on time. I'm in charge of the bond commission, which means that I work with the staff. Our job at bond commission is to approve all state and local debt. You can't borrow money in government in Louisiana without getting our approval. I manage money for the state. We manage anywhere from $6 to $8 billion in trust funds. When we're not using our money in the checking accounts, we invest it overnight. I'm in charge of unclaimed property, getting lost money back to people. I sit on, I don't know, 30 different boards and commissions by virtue of a legislative directive. And I spend a lot of time in front of the legislature trying to help them with the budget. You know, I try not to be rude, but I do. I speak my mind. My job is not to seek the approval of my political peers. My job is to protect taxpayers, and I take it pretty seriously.
You know, and we're going to get into some of the fiscal issues that this state has faced, you know, is facing now, and really has faced traditionally over the years, as we've had sort of this, maybe too often, this kick the can down the road mentality. But let me say this, because I want you to comment on this. I've as you and I talked about before the show, and we've known each other for some time, I've been following politics and government in this state for about 30 years. And over that time, I've developed pretty easy philosophy. I think it's oversimplified sometimes, but let me say to you what I believe it is. That government at all levels generally tries to do too much. We ought to try to do fewer things, focus on real priorities. Every politician who's ever elected anything talks about priorities. We don't typically do that very well in Louisiana. We ought to try to do fewer things. We ought to fund those fewer things adequately, and we ought to demand excellence from them. Typically, we cut across the board. We cut programs that we should not be doing anyway, and so instead of eliminating the program, we cut its budget and we make it even more marginal. This idea about real priorities, funding them adequately, and demanding excellence from them, that's the Tim Johnson philosophy. What's the John Kennedy philosophy?
I agree with everything you said, Tim. I mean, government at all levels has gotten too big. It tries to do too much, and therefore it does too much of it badly. It meddles too much in the free market. You cannot be for jobs if you're against business. Now, to create jobs, businesswomen and businessmen need four things. They need low taxes. They need reasonable regulations. They need good infrastructure and a skilled workforce. As far as I'm concerned, government's job is to try to help provide those things and then get the heck out of the way.
Yeah, I would add a fifth to that. Maybe it's a subset of that, but they need stability around all of those things as well.
Predictability.
Right? Predictability. And I think as I've talked to business people on both the TV show and the radio show, is that that's the word that comes back so many times. Look, tell us what the rules are and then keep them consistent. Let it be predictable. What we've done in this year, because of the budget mess that we found ourselves in, is we've raised taxes on these businesses mid-year. They didn't have an opportunity to budget for that, but now they've got to scramble to figure out how to do it. I think you, as well as I, have talked to business leaders who've said, we're all in doing our share to fix this mess, but we need that stability. What do they tell you?
Oh, I think you're right. There are two schools of thought in government today, at least at the state level, and I think at the federal level too. And it's not Republican and Democrat. It's those of us who believe in more freedom and those who believe in more free stuff.
Right. More government. Right?
More government,
right.
More free stuff. I mean, I believe in more freedom. I believe that government has a role to play, but it's a limited role. And I think that's the seed of our problem. Government's gotten too big, and it tries to do too much, as you said. What's going on at the state level is a huge mistake, in my judgment. We have had deficits for 6, 7 years now, and the reason is very simple. Every year the legislature, usually at the encouragement of the governor, spends more money than it takes in. We've got a spending problem. We're number one in the South in state and local spending per capita. In the last 10 years, the economy's grown 25%, not bad, but state government's grown 42%.
Right.
Now, Governor Edwards doesn't agree with that. He's going to tax us into prosperity. I don't think it can be done. And if you don't believe me, look at Greece.
That's right. Well, and there are a lot of examples of that out there. Let's take a break. We come back. I want to get into more detail about your thoughts on the solutions, both short-term and long-term, to some of these budget issues that we're facing. We're visiting with State Treasurer John Kennedy. and you're watching the Louisiana Business and Industry Show.
It might be one of the most efficient, most effective methods of communications we've ever used.
What if I said that the American dream is alive and well, and that it exists for anyone willing to build it? That the power of a nation does not reside in its monuments, but in the hearts and minds of those who built them, and that the country's greatest heroes also wear hard hats. In today's America, it's not enough to dream about the future. You have to build it. Build your future at byf.org.
For more than 25 years, the TJC Group has been helping industry communicate and build relationships with communities, elected officials, and governmental agencies. We are the leading firm in the U.S. for the development, management, and facilitation of industry-based community advisory panels.
Whether you're building a new facility or you manage an existing business, let us put our community and governmental relations experience to work for you.
The TJC Group, facilitating solutions for business and industry.
Spadel's Florist was founded over 30 years ago. From my mom's kitchen, we have grown into one of the largest florists in this area. There's a sense in our community that you stick together, good times or bad. And oil and gas is part of that family. They're my neighbors, they're my customers, they're the person I'm sitting next to at church. If oil and gas is doing well, all of our businesses are doing well. We are Louisiana Oil and Gas.
Welcome back to the Louisiana Business and Industry Show. Very pleased to have as my guest State Treasurer John Kennedy. We got into a little bit about the discussion in the last segment of the fiscal situation our state finds itself in, and honestly has found itself in for years and years and years without really having been addressed. You mentioned that in the first segment that your belief is that Louisiana doesn't have a revenue problem, we have a spending problem. I saw the same study that you quoted that said if you compare Louisiana to 12 other southern states and Texas, so 13 other states, and you look at state and local revenue generated, tax revenue generated per capita, we're at the top of the list. So there's a disconnect there. Help us understand the disconnect, and then let's start talking about short and long-term solutions to these issues.
Well, let me be specific, Tim. 22% of all of our managers in the classified service of state government manage one employee. 22%? 22%. The average manager manages 4. Those aren't my numbers. They came from the legislative auditor. We've got 18,710 consultants. No reasonable person believes we need all of them.
That's a staggering number.
I understand they make campaign contributions, and I understand that they've got political clout, but that should be irrelevant. Number 3, last year, according to PAR, we had 900,000 visits that taxpayers paid for to emergency rooms for routine care. What does that mean? That means that right now, while we're talking, somebody's taking a $700 ambulance ride to go to an emergency room to get treated for a fever blister, or to get a pregnancy test, or because they have acne, or they want to have a wart removed, or want to see if they need glasses. We will treat those folks for free under Medicaid, but we do not have to. Neither federal nor state law requires us to do it in an ER, where it's 5 times more expensive. You know what the Department of Health and Hospitals is doing about that? Nothing. Zero. Nada. I've shown them the solution. All they got to do is go over to Houston's Memorial Hermann Hospital and copy their patient navigator program. And I could keep going here. I mean, 3% of all of our Medicaid patients spend 43% of the money. And I'll tell you what a rational...
Say that again.
3% of our Medicaid patients spend 43% of the money. 3% of the 1.4 million people on Medicaid spend 43% of the money. I know what I'd do, or you would do, if you were running DHH. You'd go find out who those 3% are. 10% of Medicaid spending in Louisiana is attributable to fraud. It's not my number. That came from President Obama's head of CMS.
Well, and calculate that in real numbers, because this is a multi-billion-dollar program in Louisiana. So 10% is significant money.
We have 1.4 million people on Medicaid. This year we'll spend about $8.3 billion. So 10% of that is $830 million. About 40% of that is state money, 60% is federal money. And my colleagues say, well, a lot of that's just federal money. Well, where do they think this federal money came from? It didn't just fall from heaven.
That's our tax dollars too,
That's our tax dollars too. It is ludicrous to say that we can't save money in this budget. Let me give you an example. Right after Katrina in November 2005, 25% of our economy was gone. The Louisiana legislature met in 17 days in a special session and cut $600 million from the budget. That's the equivalent of $900 million a day. Was it tough? Sure. That's what business people and families have to do every day. So when they say it can't be done, what they're really saying is they don't want to do it. They're gambling that they can raise all these taxes on the business community and working families, and in 4 years when they run for re-election, voters will forget.
You know, one of the things as Republicans that we often face is this criticism that we don't have compassion for those who are less fortunate. And I say to people, nothing could be farther from the truth. I don't want a single needy child to go without health care. I don't want a single needy elderly person to go without health care. But I want us to spend those dollars wisely so that we can afford to take care of those who are truly needy. That's really your philosophy too, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, last year, the American taxpayer spent $1 trillion, $1 trillion in state and local social programs helping their low-income neighbors. We're the most compassionate people in the world. But at some point, these social programs were, you have to admit, they were meant to be a bridge.
Right.
They've become a parking lot. And what we've got to do is stop seeing our low-income neighbors as victims who need a handout, which breeds dependency, and start seeing them as workers and help them get a job. Now, I don't want to take food stamps away from people in need, but I do want people to need fewer food stamps. And to do that, you need to help the folks who are able-bodied, who are young enough to go get employment. And government is not doing that. It's measuring success, not how many people we get off food stamps, but how many people we get on. And that's why Americans feel angry and stuck, because they look around and see too many people at the top getting bailouts and too many undeserving people at the bottom getting handouts, and they're in the middle and they're getting the bill and they can't afford it anymore, and they're angry, and I don't blame them.
Well, and what you've seen is the rise of politicians on the left like Bernie Sanders and on the right like Donald Trump as a result of the frustration that people feel over the constant expansion of government.
Absolutely. I mean, the anger out there you see reflected in Mr. Trump's voters, and you see it reflected in Senator Sanders' numbers. Senator Sanders folks are angry that there are too many undeserving people at the top getting special treatment and bailouts. And they're right. And many of Mr. Trump's supporters are angry that there are too many undeserving people at the bottom getting handouts. And what everybody's angry at is those of us in the middle get the bill, and we can't pay it anymore. Because thanks to Obamacare, our health insurance has gone up, our tuition's gone up for our kids, our taxes have gone up. We just can't pay it anymore. And Americans feel stuck, like there is no more American dream, because it's harder than ever to get ahead, and it's easier than ever to do nothing.
We'll take a break. We'll come back. We're going to jump into your campaign for the U.S. Senate. You've announced that you're running. You're out there politicking, campaigning pretty hard. I want to know what's going on.
I'm kissing baby.
There you go. We're visiting with State Treasurer John Kennedy. You're watching the Louisiana Business and Industry Show. Tim Johnson here for Gulf Coast Occupational Medicine. With some of the most knowledgeable and hardest working medical professionals in Louisiana and 8 convenient locations in Greater Baton Rouge, Gulf Coast provides injury management, physical exams, medical surveillance, and substance abuse testing. Once you know the folks at Gulf Coast, you'll realize they are your best option to protect your safety record and your bottom line. Gulf Coast Occupational Medicine. Ride the wave to safety.
For more than 20 years, the TJC Group has been helping companies assess their training needs and to develop programs that improve the effectiveness and productivity of their teams.
Training doesn't have to be expensive or complicated. Let us put our experience and expertise to work for you.
The TJC Group, facilitating solutions for business and industry.
What if I said that whatever good things you build you? And that in this economy, sweat never loses its value. What if I said that there isn't a challenge in the world too great for a craft professional with the right tools, and that the steps that lead from where you are to where you want to be can only be built by you? Build your future at byf.org.
Keene Miller traces its roots to the dawn of the petrochemical industry in Louisiana. As the legal needs of the sector grew, our firm emerged as a leader in environmental law, economic development, real estate, employment, utilities regulations, and more. Today, these same clients and those new to our state continue to rely upon the firm and its attorneys for creative ideas, practical advice, and Louisiana know-how. Industrial strength law. Learn more at keenemiller.com.
Welcome back to the Louisiana Business and Industry Show. We're visiting with State Treasurer John Kennedy, who also is an announced candidate for the U.S. Senate. So let's jump into that. You and I were talking during the break about the question that I got asked often as a political candidate, and I'm sure you have over the course of your career. You've made the announcement to run for David Vitter's soon-to-be open U.S. Senate seat. Why?
I want my country back. I'm afraid we're losing it. I want to repeat what I said earlier. The American people feel stuck and they feel angry, and I understand why. Because I look around, I see too many undeserving folks at the top getting special treatment, getting bailouts. And I see too many undeserving people at the bottom getting handouts. And the people in the middle who get up every day and go to work and obey the law and pay their taxes are getting the bill and they can't pay it anymore.
And it's not sustainable.
It's not. And you know who gave them that? The United States Congress, for one. And I blame both sides of the aisle, the Ritz-Carlton Democrats and the big government Republicans. There are many good members of Congress, but as a group, as an institution, I haven't figured out what they're good for the last 8 years.
Well, obviously haven't gotten the job done. No. Now, we're approaching $20 trillion, I think is the number, in overall debt.
And what that means is the United States Congress spent $20 trillion more than it took in and filled the hole by borrowing money that has to be paid back by you and me and our children.
And our grandchildren.
Right? And our grandchildren. Right. I think President Obama's done a lousy job for the American people. I think Secretary Clinton will do even worse. As far as I'm concerned, the United States Congress, President Obama, Secretary Clinton, they ought to be ashamed what they've done to the American people in the last 8 years. I've said it before, I'm going to say it again. They ought to hide their heads in a bag. You know? I mean, and that's why the American people, all across the political spectrum, are angry. And they're scared. There's a fine line between fear and anger.
One of the big issues, and in fact, Congressman Garrett Graves was on the show last week, and I asked him this same question, is that if you look at approval ratings for Congress overall, they're at an all-time low. Gridlock and partisanship are at all-time highs. How do we fix Washington? I mean, how do you balance, and this is the question I asked Garrett, how do you balance standing on principle that we have to do if we want to get our country back, with the ability to reach across the aisle, compromise, and actually get some things done? How do you balance that?
Well, I'll give you an example. There's a bill that's, I think, will be ultimately passed within the next few months. It's called the Toxic Substances and Control Act. It's a bill that basically reforms the way we regulate chemicals in America. It's been put together by, on the Republican side, by David Vitter. It's being put together on the Democratic side. I think Lautenberger started. I don't know who's championing it now, but it's gone through the House and the Senate, and they're just trying to reconcile it. They did that by getting everybody at the table. They didn't sacrifice principles, but they got everybody at the table. The environmental groups, the Chemical Association, business, the bureaucracy, and they just worked and worked and worked. Now, look, I'm not going to sacrifice my principles for the purpose of just getting a bill passed. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go to Louisiana, to Washington and fight for Louisiana. But I'm pretty proud of my record here in the state. I've balanced 16 budgets. I've earned about $1.5 billion for taxpayers by investing their money. I've returned $315 million in unclaimed property. And I've stood up to politicians a lot more powerful than me, and I'll do the same thing in D.C. I'm not part of the club here, don't want to be. And I won't be part of the club up there. But I've been pretty effective in Louisiana, I think.
We've got about 2.5 minutes left in the show, so I want to get to a couple of things. And the first is this regional Greater Baton Rouge area transportation gridlock, this traffic situation. Give us about 30 seconds on what U.S. Senator John Kennedy would do and focus on in order to try to relieve some of this, both in the short term and the long term.
Well, first, part of it is Congress's problem. Congress has this bad habit of diverting money from the Highway Trust Fund to things like landscaping, bike paths, nature trails. Those aren't priorities. I would change that in Washington. Number two, I would encourage the leadership at the state level to spend the money that we do have on infrastructure. We collect about $600 million a year, roughly, in state gasoline tax. Every penny of that goes to pay overhead at DOTD. Every single penny. If we didn't get federal money, we wouldn't have any money for roads. We spend less than 30% of our building budget on roads. I've watched the politicians build a fence around a private subdivision in New Orleans. I've watched them build splash pools. I watched them build new museums. Those are all nice things to do, but they're not roads. And you can't very well complain about your roads when you're not spending the money that taxpayers have given you on those roads.
We got about a minute left, 30 seconds or so. As a candidate for the U.S. Senate, what's your general message to the business community in Louisiana?
You need to ask me what I believe. I believe in God. I believe in protecting the life of the unborn. I believe government is too big, as we talked about. I believe in more freedom, not more free stuff. I believe that America's the strongest country in the history of the world, and we need to start acting like it. I was telling somebody the other day, I believe that love is the answer, but I think you ought to own a gun just in case.
Trust but verify.
I also believe that our future can be better than our past and our present, but we've got to start remembering who we are as Americans.
I'm going to have you back on the show sometime this year to talk
Tim.
more about what's going on with your campaign.
Thank you, Tim.
Treasurer John Kennedy, thanks for being with us.
Oh, listen, it was great fun.
Look forward to following your campaign very closely. That's a wrap, guys. Thanks for joining us. Join us again next week at this very same time for another edition of the Louisiana Business and Industry.